Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Northern Kentucky Spotlight Podcast powered by C Crew Consulting. I'm your host, Sarah Brookbank. Today on the podcast, we are joined by JC Baker of the Business Hospital. He talks about how they diagnose business health and how they're serving business owners across the world. We are also joined by Tara Johnson Noem of the Northern Kentucky Area Development District and Seth Cutter of CBG, who talk about Home for All, a recently released housing strategies report, and how it could impact Northern Kentucky. Thank you to our podcast sponsors, C Crew Consulting and Schneller Knockelman. As a chamber member, you can save money on business essentials by visiting nkychamber.com/savings. Save money by gaining access to resources that will help your business run more efficiently while improving your bottom line. You can reduce daily expenses, manage operations more efficiently, and keep your business growing through the Northern Kentucky Chamber's cost-saving partnerships. Like I said, you can learn more all about our savings at nkychamber.com/savings. Now, let's go meet our members of the week, hear from our sponsors, and I'll be back with this week's guests.
Ranking on Google Search and Maps is easy to understand, but hard to do. It requires constant effort and attention, uploading new photos, responding to Google reviews, writing weekly posts, and checking suggested updates. Google listing optimization takes experience and time, and there are no shortcuts. C Crew gives your Google My Business account the steady, consistent attention it needs to be effective, optimizing, updating, and expanding critical content every single week. From local retail stores to large regional networks, C Crew generates content, establishes benchmarks, and creates dramatic, measurable increases in engagement. So what can C Crew do for your business? More calls, more clicks, more clients.
Congratulations to our members of the week. You can learn more about these businesses by following the Northern Kentucky Chamber on social media, where we will highlight one of these businesses each day. Now, let's meet our members of the week. Founded in 1994, Track Group has built a strong reputation in Greater Cincinnati by delivering exceptional staffing and recruiting solutions with a personal, people-first approach. Emerging Leaders of NKY is a nonprofit dedicated to nurturing the growth and success of our region's emerging leaders. Reth Construction is a family-owned company located in Northern Kentucky that has been in business for almost 20 years. ECDI provides responsible, affordable lending and comprehensive small business development services to help underbanked people and communities join the economic mainstream. Hi, everyone. Today I'm with Dr. JC Baker of the Business Hospital. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm glad you had me and had me come on in, so thank you.
Yes, and so you are the founder of the Business Hospital. It's great to have you. You work with such a range of people all over the world with the Business Hospital. Tell us a little bit about your organization.
So the Business Hospital are three organizations. The Business Hospital Institute is a 501c3. You would think of that like a cancer research institute. That's where all of our business intelligence goes into. It's a closed system, so it can't be pulled from outside, and that's important for us as we treat our patients. The Business Hospital is a 501c6, so very similar how your chambers are. It's a membership organization, so we treat all of our patients through there. And then we've got Dr. Baker and Associates, the Business Hospital, and that's our for-profit side. So if you had to think about it, if a patient went and was burned in a fire, well, you would need the information on how to treat burn victims. Then the hospital would treat that victim. But what if the victim didn't like the way they look? They can go get plastic surgery. And insurance wouldn't cover it, but if they can afford it, they can have it. That's essentially what our for-profit side is like, is when a business wants us to do something that might be unique or a little bit more hands-on, they can afford it from there. So essentially those three operations make up the Business Hospital, and we specialize in providing health to the business to make sure the business itself is a healthy entity.
Right. And how are you determining business health when you're working with these patients?
So I invented the Business Health Index. It's like a body mass index. There's 22 different metrics that every business has to have. And so for an example, it's not this ambiguous or mysterious metric. One is sales, another is human capital management, another is your supply chain, another is internal controls and operational efficiency. So we look at 22 different metrics of a business to determine the quality of health of that business. So whether that business says we want to make $100 million or whether they want to be just a single member LLC that makes $60,000 a year and they just want to duplicate that year after year, there's a baseline of health. And so we use that as our primary methodology.
Okay, so that sounds like you work with a lot of different types of businesses too. Tell us a little bit about the type of patient clientele that you guys have.
So we work with every business type. It really isn't one is better than another. So we are industry agnostic, size agnostic, scale agnostic, class agnostic. And the reason is because I found a way to standardize the care. So whether you are male or female, black or white, from the US or Uganda, if you were to pass out, the physician will look at your eyes, your nose, your throat. They would check your heart rate, your blood pressure. All of that is standardized.
Mm-hmm.
We look at a business very similarly and say, what are the commonalities in the business? What are the known metrics that determine health? And then we program around that, and then we nurse to that. Now, the nuances might differ. For an example, a restaurant is different than a barbershop, which is different than a startup, which is different than a corporation in nuance. But they all got to sell stuff. They all got people. They all got a supply chain, and they got to tell people what they do and convince them to participate with it. That is standardization. And so those metrics determine our baseline for health.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you're approaching it all from the same level. Obviously, those nuances are really different. So when you're talking to potential customers, when you're talking to these patients, what types of concerns do you guys kind of see across the board? What are some of those most common concerns?
Well, when we go in, what we find is that oftentimes business owners aren't really certain what their issues are.
Mm-hmm.
So they believe they know based on the outcome of a scenario. So for an example, if it was your body, you would have a symptom, but the symptom doesn't tell you what to treat. So in that, we have to find the underlying treatment of it. So one, and I don't want to say this to sound mean, but it legitimately is ignorance. And
Mm-hmm.
we are in a climate, a dispensation of time, a generation where the information is so bad amongst people is that we perpetuate falsehoods. So if you self-diagnose, you'll probably self-diagnose a falsehood in your business.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll say, well, hey, all I need is a couple more dollars and I'll be able to, so who has access to capital? Well, that is not necessarily the issue. It could be distribution. It could be the deployment of your product or your service. It could be placement. It could be a host of realities that you never considered because you accepted the misdiagnosis. So that's what we see typically, and that gets difficult because we have to kind of debunk and demystify their mentality and say, look, we know why you said that, but we need to take this a little bit further. This is more about what it is.
Yeah, I think so many business owners, I know we work a lot with small businesses, they're doing that day to day. When you're really in the thick of it, I'm sure it's really hard to take that zoomed out view, look at everything, especially you said you look at 22 different metrics. It's a lot of different factors going into each of those businesses.
It is. And when you say you work with small business, this even gets difficult amongst just understanding in the masses. Small business, by definition, according to SBA, is $50 million or less, 500 employees or less. 99% of all U.S. citizens work for or employed by a small business.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally not the backbone of the U.S., it is the U.S. So when we look at misconceptions of a business, it's no way possible that the barbershop knows to understand a pro forma. Why would they know a pro forma? They know how to cut hair, they know how to do hair, they even understand how to charge booth rent. They wouldn't understand a pro forma on average. Not to say that they're not capable, it just wouldn't be in their sphere of understanding, just like a person that specializes in finances may not know the newest hairstyles. They just wouldn't know it because it's not within their purview. So when we look at those 22 different metrics to the micro, boutique, family-owned business, is that we want them to do the work that they're accustomed to. So if you've got Nana's special recipe and you create a restaurant out of that, there's a whole lot about operations and supply chain awareness that you just may not be aware of. Mm-hmm. And so with that, you want to lean on an expert just like you're the expert in Nana's recipe.
Yeah. And you mentioned that misconception with small businesses. Are there any other misconceptions with small businesses, especially you mentioned they make up a very large portion of our country's work. So anything else that you think that?
Well, one thing is really the misconception of titles themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, immediately somebody says they're a CEO. Well, by definition, that means you have a C-suite. Then by definition, you have a mid-level. And by definition, you have an entry level. That's not the case. 83% of all businesses are single-member LLCs. That means you're a one person. Now, let me tell you why that's important. It's not about titles for the sake of titles. It's the misunderstanding of your resources. When you're a CEO, you have the complement of having resources at your disposal. There is a CFO, there is a CMO, and then even those individuals have a team that's working under them that makes everyone better in theory. Mm-hmm. When you're a single member LLC or you're a partnership, you're lacking. And there's a time that we take, when I say we, the entrepreneur, the small business owner, would take pride in the fact that they wear so many hats. Just, I'm wearing all the hats, I'm doing all the stuff, junk and things. But really, it makes you deficient and inadequate. And it also increases burnout and frustration and failure. So you really should be sticking toward what you're really good at and then farming the rest of those tasks and duties out and using your ecosystem. For an example, like the chamber. The chamber may have knowledge of what you need in a given scenario, but because you feel like you have to do it yourself and that you can lean on Google to do the rest, well, now that becomes problematic. So understanding really who you are is that, you know what, I'm a single member LLC and I'm really good at making Cajun dishes, and that is enough. That is fine. Now I need a team to help me do the rest, even if that team is a team of outsiders. Your accountant is a part of your team. The chamber is a part of your team. A volunteer is a part of your team. Mm-hmm. But we don't necessarily see it that way, and I'm not saying that as speculation. I know that to be true based on the 1,600 patients that we work with around the world. Their behaviors are similar, so empirical data tells us we go into it just with the wrong mentality.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to break that mentality too. Like you said, entrepreneurs, they want to own it all, they want to do it all. And we respect that, but it is good to know that there are people and organizations out there to help you continue to grow your business. And when you're working with these patients, what's this process like? How can people get in touch with you? What types of things do they need to know before reaching out to the business hospital?
Well, one, we provide assessment and diagnosis for nothing out of the gate. And the reason why, and some people thought that when I created the business hospital that I did it as marketing or branding, and it wasn't. I invented the industry. I fully intend to change how we view business in order for us to be healthier with that. So I do have 2 PhDs. One is in business and leadership. The other is business and artificial intelligence. But I say that because my concern is that your business is healthy. So if this was the medical world and you got shot with a bullet, they're going to treat you first. Mm-hmm. They'll ask about your insurance later. Now, they're not going to keep you for 10 days without insurance, but they'll get that bullet out that day. If you passed out, they're going to try to revive you immediately right there in the ambulance. We're no different. So if someone emails us or they go into our website and they put in a contact form, they're going to get a response within the hour. And then once they get that response, we call that accelerated assistance, is we need to know what's wrong with you. Timeliness saves a lot of issues. So if you've got to wait a long time for an answer, you might make a poor decision. We don't want that from the business owner. So we want to be a right now resource that says, what do you think your problem is? We're going to insert answer and insert diagnosis. From there, you got a choice on if you want long-term treatment or not. Mm-hmm. And then we would walk you through what treatment looks like.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's different for everyone. But Dr. Baker, it's been so great to have you on. And I know one of the things that I think a lot of business owners would find really useful right now, as we know things are a little crazy economically for some of our businesses. What kind of recommendations do you have for business owners right now?
Actually, a lot. It's hard to even shove into our time today, but one is understanding the truth. When you talk about having economic problems, we invent those problems. We don't even have those problems in the first place. But because we believe a lie, we now invent a problem. I'll give a case in point to that. Average business owner in our nation makes $69,000 a year. Average household income, whether you're a business owner or an employee, doesn't extend past $112,000 nationwide, and that group of individuals are Asian Americans. If you're Black, that number drops to $59,000. Why am I saying that? If you're a business owner and you're not taking home 6 figures, you feel like a failure. And that's a lie. You're not a failure, but you'll feel like you are, and you'll put unnecessary pressure on you to then make poor decisions or desperate decisions trying to obtain something that maybe isn't reserved to you based on your business model or your product or service offering. Number 2, when we talk about economic times, is based on how we view the world, will determine our habits. So what we invest in, what we spend on, where we turn our attention to, we can be easily distracted. And because we're distracted, we might buy equipment we don't need. We might invest in a marketing campaign that will yield us under 1% return, but we've spent our reserves on something that didn't have a good ROI from the beginning. But we would do that to chase something that might be a unicorn or a myth. That plagues the business owner, is that they see something in social media and they think, oh, I need to be doing that. When the thing that they're looking at literally is a hologram. You can never obtain it. So really it's about having better information, better data, better inputs for your decision making. So therefore your expectation for output is a little more sober. And you can say, you know what, if I had a business and I made $84,000 a year and I can control that, I'm doing good. But instead it's, man, I only made 84 grand and I've been working hard, and now you're not looking at it with the right lenses, the right goggles, and you can take something that actually is positive, now it feels like a negative.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So it's all about the way you look at it. Obviously, you are working with a lot of businesses, not just in the U.S., across the world at this point. So, Dr. Baker, before I let you go, is there anything else that you think our viewers and listeners need to know about the business hospital or about you, about your organization?
Is that one, we legitimately care about the health of that business. And I want to explain the health. Is that how you go about starting your business and the why on why you start the business, that becomes your driving force. Everything isn't about scale. How much have you scaled? How much did you make? Was your profits X percentage year over year? Those things are important to some industries and some companies for certain purposes, but they're not important to others. So sometimes people have a lifestyle business, and that lifestyle business needs to be sustainable to function the lifestyle. One thing that's shown us by working internationally, so we've seen work in South America, we've seen work in Australia, we've seen work in Africa, is that everyone is facing the same issues regardless of climate. Now, there are some differences such as municipalities change, so governments can be different, regulation can be different, but ultimately, business owners want to create something behind a skill set of theirs or a passion of theirs. That starts everything. They need to generate dollars in order to provide and maintain a livelihood. And they kind of want to stop on their own terms. So whether they sell the business, whether they retire, or whether they transition it into something else, they want some level of autonomy. That is consistent globally. So if that is a consistent thing, just like food, clothing, and shelter, air, and love, just like those things are consistent across the globe, we probably should understand the metrics behind those realities and build out an infrastructure where that takes place. We are the foremost experts in helping understand how to go about doing that. And then we're hands-on as we nurse you to help you navigate that journey and essentially achieve the goals that you're seeking for.
Yeah. Well, that is incredible. You guys do a lot of work for these businesses. So I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Baker. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having us out.
Hi, everyone. Today I am joined by Seth Cutter from CBG and Tara Johnson Noem from NKY. Today we are talking about housing in Northern Kentucky. This has been a hot topic. Tara, we had you on last year to talk housing, but welcome you both to the podcast. It's exciting to have you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes. And so, like I said, we're talking about housing. We've talked about this income-aligned housing across the region and what that means. And this dates back like many years these conversations started. And obviously the ad district has been really involved with this. Tara, can you tell us a little bit about like the process of this and how we've gotten to this point?
Absolutely. This originally started for the ad back really immediately post-pandemic, when we had a lot of employers talking about needing more talent. How are we going about alleviating any barrier to talent attraction or retention in the area? And of course, we also talk about childcare, transportation, many other things. But housing came up as a topic where we know we had a lot of engaged partners across the region, but not necessarily a cohesive approach. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, it was decided to do the big housing study that you all are familiar with. And then following the study, we realized very quickly we had identified gaps in our housing supply, our inventory, our costs. And so what were we going to do about those things? Recognizing we have some very different communities, some suburban, some urban, some rural, there wasn't going to necessarily be just one strategy. And so this most current report, Home for All, is a response to, let's think about the strategies that would work across the region.
Well, and Tara, I think it's important to note, right, your service territory and the scope of the report covers 8 counties, right?
Right,
So
yes.
to your point about urban, suburban, rural, we have southern counties in our region that look very different than what a lot of chamber members may know in Boone, Campbell, and Canton.
Such a good point.
And this report really hits on strategies for all of those communities.
Yes, and Home for All, that came out late last year. It is a pretty comprehensive look at a vast array of different strategies that will work in different communities across our region. Like you said, Seth, it's not just for Covington and Newport and Florence. It's for Crittenden, it's for Carrollton, it's for Falmouth. So tell us a little bit about the work that went into this, because obviously you guys are looking at a lot of different regions and a lot of different needs.
Well, luckily we had a great chair for the effort.
Yes,
Our
Not
own
really.
leader.
He just brought the law.
No, but we did have a steering committee that helped us stay focused, helped us get this finished in a year's time, which may sound like a long time, but there was a lot to do. We had 90 plus individuals from across the spectrum of involved and interested parties with housing. So financing folks, developers and builders, also some of our social service sectors, that are dealing with residents that maybe are having those barriers or lower incomes. But we also had local officials and, of course, plenty of chamber members.
Yes, I know Brent was also involved
Yes.
heavily, and recently people who would have attended Exit Issues here kicking off the year in January heard a lot about this. And so one of the things that I do want to talk about is the report itself obviously lays out a lot of strategies. When you guys were doing this work and when you finally published the report, what were some of the strategies that really bubbled to the top?
Well, yeah, Sarah, it's, as Tara noted, it's been several years long efforts, but really the focus this past year in each of these subcommittees, right? We had different groups focusing on different things, like how do we retain existing income-aligned housing? How do we work on financing and policy issues, right? So each of those committees, Tara mentioned the 90 plus different subject matter experts, many chamber members, looked at things in their purview and things that overlapped, right? So things like establishing a regional housing trust fund is something that a lot of SMEs told us it's something this community probably needs to consider to help address the issue. But then you also had our partners right in the trades, the Building Industry Association really talking about, hey, the skilled trades and construction workforce, really there's some barriers and barriers even dating back to the 2008 financial crisis, where a lot of small developers have had a really hard time retaining talent. Or how do we focus on skilled trades? As Tara mentioned, workforce development is an issue for the building industry. And those were some that popped out to me. But we organized by a lot of different themes, and there were some other important ones too.
Well, like even for example, when we think about attracting new talent to the area, which is something that the chamber focuses so much on, even just knowing what properties are even available. If a company's bringing someone in, they maybe don't want to buy a house immediately, or maybe they do, but they just need to get here first and explore the area. And so even things like having an inventory of all the different landlords so that they can be contacted and say, hey, do you have anything available right now? And of course, talking to our realtors, things like financing and availability of financing. So if somebody does want to be a first-time home buyer, or maybe even they want to downsize, what's keeping someone from doing that? We know interest rates have been a little higher lately. So we talked about some of those items. And of course, we talked about planning and zoning and building inspection and all those various kinds of policy things that go into new construction, as well as even adaptive reuse.
That's right. And one important thing, Sarah, to note in all of this is we said from the outset, there is not a single silver bullet to address this issue. We have strategies and we had ideas percolate throughout the year that address local impediments, state things that the state government can think about doing, things that private businesses, chamber members can think about doing to get creative, because the more we can all recognize that we have a role to play, this issue really, Tara, as you said, dating back to the pandemic, availability, the limited availability and the lack of getting supply on the market is impacting the affordability piece, right? So if you address availability, you're going to hopefully really address affordability. And again, the idea with this menu of strategies is that what works in Crittenden, as you noted, may not work in Carrollton or Covington. So each community has different things that they may want to look at from this report.
Yeah, and what are some of those? So obviously this is a resource for these leaders. How can they use this? Like, what is the biggest thing that's going to help other leaders throughout the community when they're looking at this report?
Just one example, as we talk about our local leaders and things that they're dealing with, what we are anticipating, here at the Area Development District, we get a lot of calls from communities that they need some technical assistance. They have a general idea of what they want to do, and they just need a little help getting it done because of limited staff time, et cetera. And so we'll just take Grant County, for example. They've had a lot of increase in short-term rentals, partially because, mostly because of the ARC and the increased tourism in that area. And so we know that other communities in Boone County, Campbell County have already addressed short-term rentals and different things. And so that was something that was called out in the strategies as a way to maintain our existing housing inventory. And so I would imagine that, a community that was dealing with that particular issue could look into the report, see that there's some strategies, and then either call, the ad, call their local attorney, call, whatever resource that they wanted to go to say, oh, what would that look like locally to implement this? But it's already been vetted. It's something that is possible based on Kentucky law, et cetera. That's what we really hope that this report does, is sort out some of the things that maybe would work in another state but wouldn't work in Kentucky for various reasons.
And Sarah, particularly for chamber members, all of you who might be listening in, you can go to housingNKY.org. housingNKY.org. We'll say it again at the end. To check this out.
Yeah.
There's also a really great tool as the report. You can download it, but also kind of visually on the website, you can search this table of all these 50 strategies that we've come up. And especially, again, for private employers, you can sort that table by things that you can think about as an employer, right? Some employers, we talked about different strategies over the year, are offering different incentives, right? A different benefit for employees to help with maybe down payment assistance. There are so many things we can all be thinking about to address this issue, and that's really the culmination with Home for All.
And with this really starting, again, as a holistic conversation in that employee retention and attraction space, it only makes sense to have employers be able to be at the table to say, hey, how does this make sense to keep our own workforce where we need it?
Yeah. And outside of this report, obviously, the work, the real life work, outside of building a strategy and building a report and all of that, there are some wins that have happened in Northern Kentucky. That initial 2023 report said we're short 6,000 plus units across the region. So there have been some wins recently. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening in this space.
Well, one of the strategies that was called out in Home for All was making sure we're properly leveraging all the resources that we already have, right? Making sure that they're working together well. And so just recently in Newport, there was a story about the city of Newport partnered with neighborhood foundations and the Brain Center. They were able to get a state community development block grant to build 5 new homes that will be home ownership opportunities for people in a very targeted income range. These would be teachers, first responders, other essential workers. Brighton Center will be able to provide financial literacy and training to help make sure those people are, on a path to success in terms of home ownership. And Neighborhood Foundations is going to do the construction and do that. These are organizations that are well versed in these areas. They were able to come together and get this grant. It's a great example of just using the resources that we have in a really cohesive way, and I think it's a big win.
Yeah, that is a big win. And like you mentioned, they're already doing the work. These are already organizations that we know that are in our community trying to help people across the community. Yeah. And I love that there is some progress in filling those units that we need. So when we talk about what the future of housing in Northern Kentucky looks like, what do you guys see? What do you envision if people really embrace this report and move forward with it?
Well, I'll kick it off, Sarah, just to kind of frame really not only that question of what I think we all see for the future, but how we approach this work, which was it is becoming increasingly difficult for all kinds of people to afford a place to live in the type of housing they want that works for them and their family. You know, if you have kids living at home because it's really hard to save up for a down payment and afford, you know, your starter home because inflation is really high and we have limited supply, we want to see a future where in Northern Kentucky, in our region, we have ample supply, that folks at every income level aren't breaking the bank to find a place to live so we can continue to grow as a region, right? Our economic development partners, our chamber cannot continue to attract jobs to this area if we don't have people to fill those jobs. And like Tara said, you know, at the outset, if we don't have places for people to live, quality places to take your kids for childcare and a way to get to those jobs, amidst everything else, like good healthcare, good, vibrant, amenities, it's just going to be really hard to continue growing our region. And at CDG, obviously that's what we care about, but I think at a more fundamental level, we care about our teachers and our firefighters and our nurses and people making good wages, but who don't want to spend so much of their income on the right place to live for them. We want to have options and really create a place for everybody to be included in this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my kids are getting older. I don't want to admit that, but they are,
And you're getting younger.
I am, yes. But, as they eventually, maybe go to college or move out or get jobs or whatever the case may be for their future, I want them to ultimately live in Northern Kentucky. And I want them to feel like they can have a place here where they feel, that they're connected and that they can afford it and they're not going to move somewhere else because it's, more desirable for some reason. I want them to be here. And likewise, I know so many people have parents that are downsizing and they too want them to be here. Yeah. So I think that's why we chose the name Home for All. The realtors have used that term and I think we wanted to use it too because it just that's kind of the whole point is we just want to make sure that there's a home for all.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for coming on and giving us a big, beautiful roundup of Home for All. I know that report, everybody might not dive into it, but making sure our chamber members in our community know about this valuable resource that you guys have worked so hard on. Really appreciate your time today, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. Remember, housingNKY.org. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris Knockelman with Schneller Knockelman Plumbing, Heating, and Air. It's spring now, but before you know it, our ACs are working overtime.
Dave, it's going to be warm soon.
Right now is a good time to get the AC serviced, right?
You can get your AC tuned up for only $59.
So get your $59 tune-up at
SKPHA.com. SKPHA. So if your plumbing and mechanical systems give you trouble, just remember our name, Schneller Knockelman.
Housing is a regional priority. Having an ample supply of homes is fundamental for the Northern Kentucky region to meet basic economic needs and enable regional growth. Learn more about income-aligned housing, the region's housing needs, and why it is essential to ensure Northern Kentucky continues to be a great place to live, work, play, learn, and give back at bit.ly/NKY Housing Study.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today and learning a little bit more about the Business Hospital and the recently released Home for All report. Like Seth and Tara mentioned, you can learn more about all of those housing strategies at housingNKY.org. Thank you to our podcast sponsors, Secret Consulting and Schneller Knockelman. And finally, if you're a member who would like to be featured on the podcast, or if you're someone who is interested in joining the Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, please reach out to Lynn Ablin. And if you're a member who would like to share your workforce strategies and resources on our Talent Strategy Spotlight, please reach out to Nancy Spivey. You can find their contact information on the screen in front of you or our staff directory at nkychamber.com. And while you're there, be sure to check out our savings tab to learn how you can save money on everything from healthcare to office supplies. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll talk to you guys next week.